However, this session, Reconsidering Prevention Programs in the Community, takes a different tack from the situational approach, although there are many commonalities. I should introduce myself and say I'm chairing this session. My name is Ross Hommel from Griffith University in Brisbane, Australia. We actually only have two speakers today, myself and Professor Friedrich Lizell. Unfortunately, the third speaker, Maria Doyle from Örebro University here in Sweden, the paper has been withdrawn, which is disappointing, but hopefully we can chat about the work they're doing if they're here. Are they here this morning? Jolly good. So, anyway, so we have more time this morning than we had originally scheduled. We're going to take questions after each paper, and we'll see how we go this morning. We don't have to take the whole hour and a half, but we have, I think, two interesting papers. Naturally, I think my paper is extremely interesting, but I've heard Friedrich speak before and, of course, read much of his work, met him on a number of occasions, and this work he does in early prevention and treatment of offenders, I think, is outstanding. I'll introduce Friedrich in more detail a little later on. So I'm going to begin, and as you can see, the paper, the title is up there. What I essentially want to talk about this morning is the ongoing work we're doing in developing evidence-based developmental prevention strategies at a national level throughout disadvantaged communities in Australia. And we've managed to create a very large partnership, and we're currently engaged in a capacity building phase for what we hope in about a year's time will be a 5-year experimental study of, at a national level, of the effectiveness of community-based developmental prevention. So hence the title, Creating Capacity. The word create, as you might guess, is very carefully crafted there. It's an acronym, which I'll explain shortly. Creating capacity to take developmental crime prevention to scale. And it's a community-based approach within a national framework. So we're building on work we've been doing in Brisbane for some years through a project called the Pathways to Prevention Project. And we've built from that project a longitudinal database of nearly 5,000 children with outcomes for both those children, drawn from many sources, including our own testing. But it's effectively an evaluation of different forms of family support provided in a very disadvantaged community and the effects on child outcomes. So we're building on lessons we've learned, particularly from the governance of that work in a very challenging community. We've also drawn heavily upon communities that care and their model of community prevention that's been very well developed and tested, particularly in the United States, but also, of course, is used in a number of other countries. And, of course, we've drawn on the repositories of what are called proven or promising evidence-based programs, such as the Blueprints for Positive Youth Development repository. So the approach that we're using, we work through, like communities that care, we work through community coalitions in disadvantaged communities, and we have the great advantage that these are already in existence throughout these communities that the federal government supports. So we have ready-made coalitions, and this was one of the reasons I adopted this approach. We wanted to work with existing reasonably large-scale programs rather than use the US approach of building everything up from in each community from the bottom up, which in the Australian and I suspect in the European political system is less easy to generalise on a large scale and less easy to sustain over time. If you begin with existing government programs and try and make them better by introducing evidence and doing a number of other things, then we think we have the foundations for a more large-scale and sustainable system of evidence-based prevention. We do fuse the traditions, however, of community-centred and research-to-practice models. We are very eclectic in our theoretical foundations. I read widely in social work, community development, as well as psychology, and of course criminology and many other disciplines as well. I'll read anything which is relevant to solving this really, really tough problem of how we introduce evidence-based large-scale developmental prevention. So we aim to be evidence-based, sustainable, and well, I just said that, didn't I? So let's move on. So as I said, we're currently working on a 2-year capacity building project. This is an extraordinary project because we got funding 2 years ago. It took 12 months for all the contracts with our partners to be signed. But since we've had the contracts all finalised, our funding has doubled because we've had organisations queuing up to join our project. When the word got out, there were so many organisations interested, both government and non-government agencies interested in the work that we're doing, that we've been able to effectively double the size of our capacity building exercise. So as I've said, we're working entirely within the Australian Government's Communities for Children program, which is an effective and what I call an enduring vehicle for the delivery of child and family services for children aged 0 to 12 living in disadvantaged communities. In fact, I had a hand in the design of this program 10 years ago, and the then Prime Minister launched the program 10 years ago exactly, and he used a video from our Pathways to Prevention work as an example of what he would like to see introduced across the whole of Australia. So we've had some involvement with this work from the beginning. And so, as I've said, the focus of our current work is on strengthening the capacity of the child serving system in communities for children communities. We're not actually yet implementing evidence-based programs and evaluating their impact on child or family outcomes, but we will be doing that in the next stage, which I envisage, if I live long enough, lasting for 5 years or more, probably well beyond my period of active service. So our goals are specifically to build and test a set of structured processes and resources. Essentially, we're building what in prevention science is called a prevention support system to strengthen this Communities for Children program, which in our view is Australia's best prevention delivery system for disadvantaged communities and for children in those communities. And I'll come back to those distinctions and those definitions in a moment. So we're building a prevention support system, and as I've already said, we're aiming to ultimately transform the environments, these very disadvantaged social environments in which children are growing up. We want to make the whole system sustainable. We want, obviously, effective interventions. We want to be genuinely collaborative, and I've said genuinely because you know, it's interesting, I don't know if it's true here or in the US, but people talk about being collaborative, but it almost never happens, really. At the very best, you get cooperation or even coordination, but that is not the same as collaboration, where you set agreed goals and you agree on measures of those outcomes and so on. It's a very, very new idea in my country that program elements should all be supported by evidence. The rhetoric of evidence-based policy has now become almost universal. The practice is not universal. And of course, there's great disagreement across sectors as to what constitutes evidence. But our goal is to achieve quantitative or measurable improvements, both short-term and long-term, in outcomes for children. And we're also incorporating an economic dimension into our analysis. Now, I would argue, as a pathological optimist, that this really is achievable. People have laughed at me when I've presented that previous slide. I presented it last year at the University of Queensland to the sociologists, and they just threw up their... they said, Ross, you're dreaming. Well, yes, probably, but hey, we all have to dream. We're trying to turn that dream into reality. But I would argue that in Australia, and I suspect in much of Europe, the missing ingredient in trying to put all these good intentions into practice is the absence of, broadly speaking, knowledge about the work in prevention science, the rigorous research that is looking at what works and how it works, which is best developed, of course, in the United States. Now, to draw for a moment on the prevention science terminology, we're drawing on the work particularly of Abraham Wandersman, who published a paper in 2008 in the American Journal of Community Psychology. He draws a distinction between the delivery system, which is at the bottom, which is the large-scale implementation of innovations, the support system, as I've already mentioned, which supports the work of those who are putting those innovations into practice, and then underneath all of that, although it's at the top, the foundation or starting point is distilling information about those about innovations, the basic research, and preparing them for implementation. So we actually need a synthesis and translation system and a support system before we can have an effective prevention delivery system. Now, this is a very broad framework, and I was thinking through all of the presentations yesterday about situational prevention, that one of the advantages the situational approach has is that there's often a large-scale delivery system already made in the form, say, of the security industry. And a lot of innovations that are situational in nature, like car locking devices and so on, are all driven by industry and by economic incentives, and also by government regulation. So you've got ready-made delivery systems that already operate on a large scale. This is less so for developmental prevention, although we could probably debate that point if you think about our education and health systems. So we're focusing on those top two bits, but particularly the development of a support system. This is a list of our partners. We are working with Penn State University, particularly Mark Greenberg and Brian Bumbarger from the Prevention Research Centre, who are terrific colleagues. A range of non-government agencies, most of which operate across the whole of Australia, and also the Commonwealth Department of Social Services, which is a critical partner, but also two New South Wales state government departments and two from Queensland. And the Queensland ones are examples of those departments that have said, Ross, how dare you run this project? You're based in Queensland and I didn't have any communities from Queensland. And they said, you can't do this. This is impossible. So they've offered us quite a lot of money to join, which, and of course, being a researcher, money talks all languages. So we're working now with 5 capacity building communities in New South Wales and 5 altogether, 3 in New South Wales and 2 in Queensland, but we also have for each of those communities 5 business as usual communities. That is, business as usual means that they run the Communities for Children program as they would normally, whereas we're doing our capacity building work in 5 communities comparable with those comparison or business as usual communities. And for our current work, our key outcome variable is measures of community coalition functioning, the quality of that partnership, because that's what we're trying, that's one of the key tools or key mechanisms that we're trying to strengthen in our current work. So it's a pre-post measure of coalition functioning. We've just completed the baseline measurement across the 10 communities. And we're just developing those tools, as I mentioned, for economic analysis as well. There's a lot to do in 2 years. We need all of that extra support that we're getting. We've got a very extensive questionnaire that we've administered now to 160 people working across these 10 communities, which is giving us really rich information about the quality of these partnerships. And we're again emulating the work that's been done in the US, particularly through the Prevention Research Centre at Penn State, who have done a lot of this very extensive analysis of coalition functioning, and they've related those aspects of coalition functioning to outcomes for young people or for families. We know, for example, that the extent to which these community partnerships are oriented to the use of evidence or to understanding scientific evidence is one of the crucial intermediary variables in terms of getting better outcomes. So we're doing this in 2 ways. We're first of all developing an interactive web-based set of electronic resources. This is really important. Australia is a very large, geographically large country, It's very difficult to travel around the whole of the country all the time. We do need people based in communities who know what they're doing, but we also need highly sophisticated tools that are available online to school teachers, community workers, family workers, and so on, in the form of videos and games, evaluation tools, measurement for measuring outcomes and for doing both economic and systematic detailed evaluation of the effectiveness of work that's going on in each community. Fortunately, we're supported by a very good data exchange system that's been developed by the Commonwealth Department of Social Services. But as you might expect, governments being governments, there are rules against who can be part of this data exchange. And at the moment, you must be an agency actually funded by the federal government in order to be able to join up and use this data exchange. The technology's all there, in other words, for schools, for example, which are all funded through state governments in Australia. Schools could join, and it's critically important that they do. But we have privacy and legal issues, which the department is trying to resolve for us. So fingers crossed on that one. But in addition to those electronic resources, and I'm going to give you an example of one of the tools that we've developed in a moment, but in addition to those electronic resources, we're employing people in these communities, the capacity building communities, which we're calling collective impact facilitators. Their job is to help to implement all the elements of our CREATE model of community prevention, which I will explain in a moment. So we're developing both the human support capacity and the electronic supports and trying to do that in tandem. And of course, this is being evaluated as we go. Now, let me just briefly discuss our CREATE model and also this whole concept of collective impact. Who's heard the phrase collective impact? Okay, it's interesting. Yes, Rolf has heard of it. The idea of collective impact has taken the world of human services by storm in North America and in Australia. It's a huge social movement now, which we can't ignore, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So CREATE is our model for bringing prevention science into communities for children, systems and practices, and for achieving what everyone wants, which is collective impact. Now, this is a summary of our CREATE model, and in a moment I'm going to show you a 4-minute animation that we've created for school teachers and for community workers, which explains this better than I can. But let me run through it quickly as background, and then you can watch the animation and decide which is the more effective teaching tool, a talking head or an animation. So C is for collaboration, and I've already made the point that collaboration is very commonly talked about but rarely achieved in practice. One thing I learned, my early training was in the natural sciences and in mathematics many, many years ago, and we didn't learn a lot about human relationships in those courses. What I have learned in the 10 or 15 years that I've been working in communities is that everything you do depends on the quality of the relationships between everybody, but particularly, well, researchers and people in the communities, but also the quality of relationships between the various organisations and groups working in these difficult social environments. So R is for relationships. Everything has to be based on trust. The quality of community engagement is fundamental, and the quality of connections between organisations and relationships between people. You've got to spend time building those relationships or you achieve nothing. And it is not a waste of time to spend a year or even 2 years building trust and engaging effectively with a community in order to move on and do all the other stuff that we're so keen on. The first E stands for early in the pathway. We published a report back in 1999 for the federal government called Pathways to Prevention, and that was the first report published by the Federal Department of the Attorney General that actually put the idea of early prevention on the policy map in Australia. It was not something that people thought about, particularly with regard to crime prevention before then. And we want to keep that principle foremost within this model, that the earlier we can work to support children and families in schools, the more likely we are to have success in terms of our longer-term preventative outcomes. The A stands for accountability, and that's essentially by setting, agreeing on goals, clearly articulated goals, and believe me, if you've done this sort of work, you will know how hard it is for organisations to agree on a small number of clearly articulated goals, which must relate to clear, measurable outcomes. And there needs to be strong systems of governance and accountability with respect to whose job it is to achieve those goals. The T stands for training. Now, actually, a better word would be empowerment, the empowerment of the workforce. We're dealing very often with very poorly paid, often poorly trained people who, at least in my country, who do this work in family support and in working with troubled children. That should not be the case, but it is the case. So we have to put the development or empowerment of the workforce at the forefront of our thinking. But we've called it training because we needed a T there. But we also think of it in those other terms. And finally, of course, evidence-based. We need to have clear evidence for the effectiveness of what is actually done. We need evidence that these approaches can be implemented with integrity. Now, one of the really good things that has happened is that independent of our work, the federal government's actually now mandated that currently 30% of all the programs must be clearly evidence-based and in fact selected from a list that they are creating. And that will rise to 50% next year, and it'll go up and up in later years. So this is a very good development. So everything we've been trying to implement in our work is being supported really without our direct intervention by the government. So we're obviously doing this sort of work at a very opportune time. So now let me see if this animation actually works. Working.
Let's make a difference. Let's talk about transforming the developmental system. Let's find creative solutions to divisive problems. Let's cultivate conditions for collective action. But first, let's just talk about kids. Every child in our community is on a life path full of possibility. Their journey is one of ups and downs. Choices, consequences, chance events, and sometimes issues that are too big for them to overcome alone. It can be a turbulent pathway. That's where we all come in. As schools and community organisations, we travel alongside children and families, each of us bringing our specialised skills to deal with factors like lack of school readiness, unemployment, housing insecurity, family violence, child abuse, and social isolation. We're all motivated, but sometimes it feels like we're not making much difference, especially when we're mired in challenges, like competitive funding structures that pit us against each other, a focus on reactive problem solving at the expense of long-term planning, time and energy lost to red tape, the multiplicity of problems faced by families, and organisational silos resulting in duplication of effort. The fact is, we're working harder than ever, but the evidence shows outcomes aren't improving for many families and children. It doesn't have to be this way. By making smart, small changes, we can bring about big improvements. How? By building a better vehicle, a new framework that allows us to travel this path together. So what should this vehicle look like? Is that it? Or that? Maybe this? let's start with a blank page and really think about what components we need. First up, we need collaboration. By joining forces to address all angles of a complex problem, there's hope we can achieve real impact. But it's not enough to just come together and share a vision. We all have to ensure the things we do reinforce what others are doing. We need mechanisms to keep our collaborative relationships strong, and clear roles for each partner built on trust. This gets us going, but there's more to consider. To really make a difference, we need to understand how problems start so we can develop early prevention strategies. The ability to make change early in the pathway is critical for success, but that's not all. As we mobilise for collective impact, we need to monitor our performance. Are we moving at a reasonable speed, in the right direction? Does the data suggest we need course corrections? Without accountability, we won't get where we need to go. And there's another key component we need to add. For sustainable change, we have to develop the skills and organisational capacity of local people so the community can power itself. And finally, we can't travel in the dark. We need to look carefully at evidence and make informed decisions about which activities suit our goals best. With the right blueprint, we can create a vehicle to achieve lasting change in the community. Collective initiatives are already achieving positive outcomes all over the world. Imagine what you could do in your community. So bring your ideas, enthusiasm and expertise and join us on the pathway to a better future for our children.
Well, we have been using that for a few months now, and it is proving a very effective tool for explaining and motivating this whole concept of putting all of these bits together. My colleague Kate Freiberg scripted that animation, and we're working with a very talented group of multimedia experts in Brisbane to develop a whole range of additional videos, animations, infographics and interactive games which measure particular outcomes validly. Now I'm going to have to stop because it's 11:30. I'm going to stop in 5 minutes, even if I haven't finished. And we can have some brief discussion, and then we can hear from Friedrich, and I'll introduce him. So let me try and make a few additional points now, and then draw this to a conclusion. I've mentioned the whole collective impact movement. This really began through the publication by John Kania of this article in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And as you can see from those red headings on the left, there's a lot of commonality between what we and other prevention scientists are trying to achieve and the conditions for collective impact. The really innovative thing, the innovative aspect of the collective impact approach is this concept of a backbone support organisation. Basically, the argument is that organisations can't move from isolated impact to collective impact without an external organisation actually making that collaboration possible. And I think that is fundamentally correct, but the nature of that backbone support can vary enormously. We are building that backbone support in our own project through the prevention support system that I've talked about. And now I won't go through that in detail because we don't have time. I just wanted to mention this collective impact movement because nearly every community we're working in is independently trying to achieve collective impact without making the connections with what they're doing with us. So as I've said there's a tidal wave of interest, a tsunami of interest in this movement, but it is rather neglecting prevention science at the moment. I've talked about communities for children and I won't go through that now. Just make the point that currently, after 10 years, this program has no evidence for its effectiveness, which is a bit of a worry, because eventually some hard-nosed minister is going to say, well, we can't keep funding this. So this is really a critical time for moving this program onto a solid foundation. And I rather like that cartoon because in a way it summarises exactly what we're doing. We can be as innovative as we like, but building this capacity is really crucial because if people don't know how to do all of this, to be evidence-based, to collaborate, to set goals, to measure outcomes, then we're going to make very little progress. And that is the situation at the moment. I don't think it's a matter of being patronising. We actually have to work step by step with communities and with organisations and with schools to actually make this happen. They want it to happen, but they need to be shown how. That's just a schematic that shows all the elements of our prevention support system. I won't go through that in detail. I have some handouts which I'm happy to leave behind. I also have a paper I have page proofs of an article that is about to come out which summarises all of this as well. Oh, that's just, I like that cartoon as well. Collaboration is an unnatural act between unwilling adults. This work in the real world is not easy. I mentioned the data exchange system. Our collective impact facilitators, they're learning as they go. We are learning a lot about the nature of the work in communities and what we should be doing to make them more effective. They're pretty effective now, but we think we know how to improve their effectiveness. I will close with mentioning that part of the support system we're developing is a new measure of children's well-being. Remember, these are children aged 5 to 12. And that's a photograph of one of the children doing an earlier version of this game. But the game is now called Creature Quest. It's about a 20-minute or 25-minute interactive touchscreen game that is in the final weeks of its development by our multimedia partners. This is a measure of well-being that measures, we've done very detailed, a few weeks ago we finished a detailed factor analysis of the psychometric and the psychometric properties of the scale. There are 4 subscales: attachment to school, capacity for pro-social behaviour and to control impulses or self-control, very important of course from a criminological perspective, social and emotional confidence of the child, and supportive home relationships. We've tested this scale on nearly 4,000 children from different socioeconomic classes in Brisbane. And in addition, there are 3 executive function tasks that are built into the game, that children actually perform little tests during the game, which measure working memory, impulsivity, and essentially attention. We know this is a very useful outcome measure for children because we've used it in our Pathways database. And we're hoping that this will become available nationally and even internationally in early next year. So this measure can be used as a flag for individual child problems. It obviously can be used as a tool for the evaluation of impacts, but also you could use it like people use the Communities That Care questionnaire to construct a community profile of the dimensions of child well-being. In other words, you could look at the whole community and it's the well-being of children across those dimensions. And of course, it could therefore also be used as a social indicator over time at the level of the school or community, or state, or even at the national level if it gets used widely enough. And it is a public good product. We're not trying to make money out of it. We want it to be used as widely as possible. And that's just a prototype of a report that's produced by the game, which is available to a school principal or an organisational manager to look at the distribution of scores from the group of children that they might have tested using this game. And I'm going to stop. Oh, perhaps I should finish with that slide from Brian Bumbarger, which is actually looking at the effectiveness of Communities That Care across 80% of all the counties in Pennsylvania. I put this slide up back home to show bureaucrats and others that, yes, this community coalition approach really can work, and here is evidence that it can. with an 11% reduction over 5 years in delinquency and in negative peer influence, 33% improvement in school achievement, and 16% improvement in school engagement. So the promise is there. The challenge is to turn that promise into reality on a large scale. I shall stop and introduce Friedrich, if I can figure out how to get out of this. Here we go. Now, at this point, Friedrich, is that yours? Yes. Oh, questions, yes. Well, hopefully that will come up in a moment. Are there any questions or comments before we move on? Yeah.
You talked about the different departments that are going to be involved in the implementation of this huge programme of work. I'm envisaging that it's probably quite an expensive programme, and I just wondered whether the funding for it is coming from the Australian government or one of the individual departments. And in the video, you quite clearly show that actually budgeting can create challenges between government departments.
The program, the Communities for Children program, already exists, and it costs $100 and something million over some period. It's not hugely expensive, but within the budget of the Department of Social Services, it's not a big ticket item. Our experiment that we're wanting to get funded will be in partnership with all of these organisations and a range of others, and those organisations do mostly provide some funding support as well as a lot of extremely valuable in-kind support. So this is the structure of the scheme that we're funded under through the Australian Research Council. It's actually one where the ARC gives us money that has to be matched by our partners. So it's a well-established funding scheme. It's a very good scheme. It's extremely difficult to get funding through it, but it's worth it once you do. Yeah, I think it's achievable, but it will be a multi-million-dollar project. But the ARC has said they're keen on large-scale, 5-year projects, so we'll see what happens. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Yeah.
I thought it was a very interesting and very provocative presentation. But thinking about Scandinavia, Norway has several programs that are national programs, as you probably know. What have you learned from the efforts in Norway in terms of scale enlargement?
Look, it's a really good point. Something I need to do. I have to say I have not looked in detail at what's been happening in Norway. But if you can give me some contacts, I will do my best to find out. Do you know anything about how it's working?
Yes, yeah, I do.
Well, perhaps you could tell me.
We can get together on this, yes. And another question is, of course, the focus on the 0 to 12 is really looking at early onset of problem behaviors that have major impact on later development, which is excellent. Which outcomes are the most, important ones that your group focuses on? Well,
the answer to that question of what's, from our perspective, most important is more or less embodied in that game that we've developed. So those various dimensions of attachment to school and impulsivity, the personal, social and emotional confidence, all of these things are critically important because they're foundations not just for the prevention of crime and antisocial behaviour, but also for educational success and success in virtually every other sphere of life. Which incidentally, harking back to the discussion yesterday, I think the fact that these approaches achieve multiple benefits, if they work, is actually a real advantage of developmental prevention. And I don't want to be critical of situational prevention. I've worked with and published with Ron Clark in the past. Perhaps I should just mention, and I forgot to say this earlier, that I think it's unhelpful to set social or developmental approaches against situational approaches, because actually there's room for situational approaches within this model. Some communities do need to do very focused interventions around, for example, children roaming without supervision at night, and that is achievable. That's particularly important with Indigenous communities in Australia, where from a very young age, children are very, very independent and roam free, as it were, but unfortunately they not only get into trouble, but they can have accidents and other bad things can happen. So, yeah, how did I get onto that? Sorry, I diverted myself. But really good questions, thank you. Perhaps we should stop there. We can have a bit more time at the end for general discussion on social or developmental prevention. But now I'd like to introduce someone who probably needs no introduction, so probably I should sit down. Professor Loisel is, as most of you would know, recently stood down as Director of the Institute of Criminology at Cambridge. He's also he was at the same time Director of the Institute of Psychology at University of Erlangen in Germany. How many jobs did you do at the one time, Friedrich?
Not so many.
Not so many? It looked pretty impressive from your CV. And of course, Friedrich's enormously well known and well regarded as a psychologist and as a criminologist, and particularly for his work in offender treatment and in early prevention, and his work on social skills development in children. But today he's going to speak on the evidence for family interventions. Yes, yes.
Because then I can skip this.
I don't know how we...
Down here.
So, if we
Now
can...
it works. Okay.
Okay, sorry, there's the...
Thank you very much.
It's a huge room. If you don't hear me, please move a little forward.
I want to underline what was said, that you need really an integrated and coordinated approach. I had yesterday morning fly back to Germany because there was a German Congress on crime prevention. It's a huge Congress, 3,000 participants, and I had to present a newly established institution, the National Center of Crime Prevention. In Germany, we aimed for that for more than 25 years, and it never happened because prevention and also crime policy is very much a state issue. We have the law is nationwide, but then how it is done, the same is with the schools. And a panel of Chancellor Merkel on the future policy making in Germany on topics like family, the elderly, health, economy, and so on. And also one panel was on crime, and we proposed this center. It was our first main proposal, and to our surprise, after some years, it was now, after very long discussions, established very, very micro. A little money is now allocated, is only ensured until the end of Chancellor Merkel's period as a chancellor, but we were happy that it is a first step. And my experience yesterday when I presented the structure and the aims of this institution was exactly what you discussed. We have on this large Congress, there are hundreds of players doing some kind of prevention, but relatively uncoordinated and without any evidence base. In 99% of all programs we do not really know, and we have some knowledge that programs can also harm. I remember Joan McCord, who found out that the famous Cambridge Somerville Youth study at the end made perhaps the children or the people a little worse. This does not happen frequently, but of course we should have an impact. And I fully agree with Ross. This polarization between situational and developmental, you need both. I wrote already 20 years ago, unfortunately in German only, a paper on that. And P.O. Wikström's work is also showing you need a propensity and the situation plays a role. And the same happens with regard to a polarization. I also experience offender treatment is too late, is too costly, developmental prevention. I'm working in both areas. We will prevent some negative developments, but many will come later on to prisons and will still have the problems, and we need to do programs. So I will not have this complex approach as Ross had it. We have more isolated programs in Germany, yet some integration. But what I would like to show you is an evidence that they are working. And I need my glasses, reading glass. Here we go. This is a collaborative study done by my colleagues Marian Weiss and Martin Schmucker. And we present a meta-analysis, and then if I have time, I will add the longest study in Germany, one concrete prevention project we are doing. I do not know to say much. Ross has already introduced the topic. The aim is reducing causal risk factors and strengthening protective factors, and we have a huge increase of programs in the world. Parenting, bonding, it's complex, thinking patterns, self-control, school, neighborhood factors, and so on. And we normally differentiate between universal, these are for all, selective, single mothers and single parenthood families or minorities, and indicated where there are already some problems with the child. And we have a number of institutions where these programs are implemented. Worldwide, we have hundreds, if not even thousands of programs that are available. We have numerous more or less, emphasis on less, well-controlled evaluations. Overall, there are a number now of systematic reviews and meta-analysis, and David Farrington and I, we have summarized these some time ago. No, Farrington et al. Paper, I'm involved a little bit in that, is not yet out. There are now 30 meta-analyses. This is a huge data set now available. And the typical finding is overall there are positive effects. We should not always say, oh, it's not an effect. But one must say the mean effects are small. Ross had already mentioned these. Particularly in large studies, this is a challenge. A nationwide approach causes a lot of problems to get it properly done, and Ross emphasized this very rightly. With hard behavioral outcome measures, so really, let's say, arrest or crime later on, and with a long follow-up. But we should not be too pessimistic. Even a small effect, if it is a long-term effect, matters, because one individual criminal career of a young guy over time, youth psychiatry, prison, all these things, costs the government or the population, the state, more than 1 million, sometimes even several million US dollar or Australian dollar, whatever it is. So even if a program is very expensive, the costs per youngster or per family are relatively low. They are often only a few thousand bucks. And then you see, even if from 100 we can prevent one guy, then it will pay off already. Most programs, unfortunately, are from North America. It's still dominated by North American research. They are much more empirical and much more experimental in this field, or by English-speaking countries. There's much less controlled research in continental Europe. This is nearly in all areas of evaluation that Europe is behind. The question arises, is there transnational generalizability? What works in Minnesota may not necessarily work in a very Catholic area in Bavaria. And there is some research, multisystemic therapy, for instance, a very good program, basically. There's a Norwegian study showing good effects. No. Why is it? No. Norwegian study, no effect. An effect. Sundell in Sweden did not find an effect. So what is the difference? Two very similar countries. Sundell's interpretation is it has to do with the framing system, with the school and regulations in the different countries. Therefore, we thought we have to do some specific analysis for our country, and we did a meta-analysis on family-oriented developmental programs in Germany only. I started first with an older study we did in 2006, so nearly 10 years ago. And this was a government-funded project, 2 parts, nationwide representative survey of institutions that are doing developmental prevention. Not casework, it should be a reproducible approach, some kind of program. We found out in our representative analysis that there are approximately 1,400 different prevention approaches in progress, delivered to families. Approximately 190,000 program offers every year. This is a large number, and approximately 2 million families are reached every year if we count from this representative sample. However, when we look what we know about the effectiveness of these programs, there was in nearly all cases a lack of systematic evaluation. Most reported programs have never been evaluated, but they have wonderful brochures. They have Lord X who says, this is a great program, but this is the evidence basis. And so far, we had to do a second study at this time. We did a more systematic review of studies with at least some methodological control. And in this, we searched very thoroughly the literature we found in Germany only, please, not Europe. 1,300 references on parent education, promotion of family life, positive parenting, and so on, but only 25 studies with some kind of control or comparison. Comparison group means not really fully equivalent. Mainly weak designs, and 20 of these studies were on parenting programs. They are more easily to evaluate, and this is why a lot of evaluation focuses on them. And also the creators of these programs often come from psychology, and they are more adapted than social workers to evaluate what they are doing. But also 5 studies were on prenatal classes. This is good news. What we clearly found is there is a discrepancy, a huge discrepancy, between what is mostly applied in practice, for instance, parent-child groups, unstructured approaches, and what is mostly evaluated. These are structured programs. So our systematic review and meta-analysis at this time, overall in the treatment group or program group, we had more than 1,400, in the control group 1,100, and the overall finding was there is a positive effect. This is the post effect, and these are the follow-up effects. It's not long follow-up of these studies, and you say the effect size is Cohen's d approximately 0.40, less or lower effects in child measures like CBCL or something like that, or if the children are older, an arrest or something. But so overall, the message was relatively positive. For a long time, many people in the social area were a little anxious if we evaluate our program and nothing comes out, not as positive, then the program will be closed. Though the effects are promising, but mainly non-equivalent control groups and smaller effects in weaker studies. Now, had something happened over the last 10 years, we now updated our systematic review and meta-analysis. This is the main topic of my report. The focus is on prevention methods with an educational and psychosocial orientation. The aim of these interventions must be a direct or indirect promotion of parenting and family life. So the family is the focus, not a broader focus on school. We have also done a systematic review on this, but here on family. The targets, family or parents only or the whole family, not children only. This is a separate area. There must be some kind of program character, so it's replicable, I mentioned this. And the typical programs in practice are parent-child groups, parenting training, pre- and postnatal courses, programs for improved family relations, competencies for everyday life, a very important area for deprived families. They cannot really structure their daily life, family leisure education, and so on. The programs must have been implemented in Germany. The report could be in English language, but it must be a German program. Governments also like this because they do not want fund too much research that goes on in England or somewhere. Comparison and control group must be available with no program or with a waiting control group or other program that is less intensive. An extensive literature, I don't want to get you bored, the typical searches, databases, reviews, primary studies, dissertations, unpublished reports, and so on, where you can get. We found now more than 4,000 publications on this topic in Germany only, but the majority are without any empirical data. 233 papers looked tentatively promising, so we really digged into them. The detailed analysis showed we had to exclude some because it was a program description only. Often it was not a controlled evaluation, so a comparison or control group was missing. We also had repeatedly double publications of the same data set. So finally we ended up with 45 studies, and this means 51 comparisons, because in some studies there were different groups compared, so you have more than comparisons than studies, but I will use the word studies now, that met our eligibility criteria. And 27 were unpublished reports, so this is not so bad. We did the typical work of coding in these systematic reviews and meta-analysis, type of program, target group, methodological characteristics, parent-related outcomes, parenting behavior, for instance, positive parenting, parenting experiences with their children. Personality aspects were also several times used as outcome measures, and also the social context, support from others, and so on. Child-related outcomes, social emotional variables, scales on aggressive behavior, and so on. Cognitive variables like school achievement or test scores. We calculated net treatment effects, and we integrated separately for each of the outcome constructs. And we calculated mean weighted effects according to Lipsey and Wilson and Hedges and Olkin. So here we see something that is promising, as you can see here. The number of studies has substantially increased, particularly since 2000. Only a few older studies. Here now we have a number of dissertations also, and here we have journal or chapters, and here we have project reports, so blue literature as we call it in Germany. So there is an increase. Overall now more than 4,000 families in this data set, treatment group more than 3,000, more than 2,000, sorry, control group 1,800. 42% had universal prevention as a target of evaluation, 58% targeted prevention, that means single mothers, migration background or so. 50% of families with children early childhood and preschool age. This is when parents are normally very open to these programs. And 50% with an active recruitment of families. This is different from practice, where often the families have to come to community centers and so on. In the projects, they often try to recruit actively the family. Program types, 32 were parenting training. Still, the majority in evaluation is parenting training, structured programs. Gordon, Obstapia Steep, our own EFFECT program, Strong Parents, Strong Children, Triple P, and so on, all these well-known programs. 7 studies on pre- and postnatal programs, PKIP, coping. Some may not know these. Some are German adaptations of programs, and some are really originate in Germany. Parent-child groups, parent relations programs, very popular in Germany, training of everyday competencies, leisure programs, open encounters for migrant families. This is a very popular approach. Unfortunately, we don't have these ones represented in the data set. So this clearly supports, we're doing a lot, but we don't know what we really get out of it. In 37%, the participation was only by the parents, mainly the mothers as in real life. But 9% of programs, the parents and the children were together, and in 18%, like in our EFFECT program, it's a combination of a parent and a child program. Now, theoretical background, I fully agree with Ross, it must be neglected. We have theoretical approaches, but this mainly is possible very clearly in the parenting training programs when you have one of the Patterson or one of the learning theory approach. As you see, most frequently social learning, others humanistic, some also with psychodynamic elements, and here we have eclectic. The eclectic thing, I think, will increase over time, and when you really look into the program, then this column will shrink down because they often include other things as well, and it's not only classical social behavioral or cognitive behavioral program. Other program characteristics, most are short, 6 to 10 sessions only. It's more easy to get the money for that, more easy to implement, and so on. And each session, 60 to 180 minutes, it depends. Mean group size is 10. The program structure, detailed manual, this is only the parent training, 23 of the studies. A specification with some flexibility, 5, and largely a free arrangement. And in our older survey, we ask them when these was a free arranged without any structure, do you at least have some specific data? Who is participating and so on? It's often not possible to get this. They say, we do not want to ask the parents details about that and so on. But of course, how can you systematically improve your approach when you do not know who is dropping out, who is staying with you? Details are necessary. And the older study had some impact. It was surprisingly well received by the various players in the field, and they improved at least process evaluation since then. No equivalent treatment control group, 25 of these studies. Incidental groups with minor differences. So this would be level 2 of the Maryland scale of methodological quality, 9 studies, and a controlled assignment and randomized controlled trial or a systematic matching procedure, 11 of these studies. Sample sizes, median 34, 32, so mostly smaller studies, and only 20% had a sample size of more than 100. This is also rather typical in these program evaluations, and your approach is a huge one. Outcome measurement, mainly within 3 months after the program. So do we really know an impact on development when we measure within 3 months? Approximately half of the studies had no follow-up, 8% had 2 or more follow-ups, and 7%, but the absolute numbers are 4 and 3, with a follow-up of more than 1 year. But this is not typical only for Germany. This is a relatively widespread picture in many countries. Now, effects. Overall effect, you see positive and highly significant parent measures in the 40s, as before, the D coefficient, child measures lower. Oh, this is still, I had to translate a German. I should have canceled this. This is the overall of both measures, 35 a D. Not a huge D, but a highly significant one. When we look to more differentiated outcome measures, here are the numbers of comparisons they are based on, and here are the D coefficients, and here you have the significances. You see without only one had a P10, all others had at least 0.1 or 0.001. Parent-oriented outcomes, larger parenting behavior, support, supervision, and so on, but most self-report. So, experience in parenting situation, stress experiencing, 34, personality issues, I get now more patient, I feel I'm better controlled in my family interactions, I'm less anxious, 35, social context variables. The program now more support by my wider family, for instance, the child measures, 27 and 30, the cognitive measures, and the more behavioral measures, nearly the same. We could not differentiate here too much because you have very different areas, and then you end up with 2 studies on a specific measure, and then it is misleading. But overall, positive effects, no doubt. Post-treatment and follow-up. These are the parent measures. It goes down a little bit. Here you see this is good news. It is a little different from what we found in 2006. The follow-up is even a little larger. This is not a significant difference because this is a smaller number of studies here, but it remains stable. Universal versus targeted prevention. Here you work with a whole school or with a whole class. Here you work with a selection of risk families, and here you work with some families that have already behavioral problems, may it be on the parent side or on the child side. And you see clearly stronger effects in indicated prevention, and in selected a little stronger, lowest effects in universal prevention. This is also nothing new. We found it repeatedly in other systematic reviews, in international reviews. And it's plausible, because at first you may think, oh, it's easier to change people when they do not have any problems or particular risk. But the problem is then you address in your prevention program, let's say from 100 families, 85% would not need a program, and they develop well without a program. So you have only a small number that is included where the program really has an impact. And this is found in a number of studies also by Mark Lipsey and others that indicated that does not mean you should not do universal, because you have a wider, reach a wider population with a universal program. And it's also found that a universal program, those who benefit most are the risky families. But in the effect sizes, you may see the effects, overall effects are lower. Design quality, unfortunately, as before, larger effects when there is less control. When there's a well-controlled experiment, the effect sizes are going down. Other methodological moderators and effect size, larger effects in softer outcome measures, self-reports on parenting, measures that are close to the content of the program, knowledge on parenting behavior. When you get a program, 10 sessions, and learn about that, you remember and you give the right answers. There's a correlation between these characteristics. Larger effects in small samples. This is something that is highly important, and this is why Ross puts so much emphasis on implementation, because we often think we have a demonstration program, a pilot or so. Okay, good effects. Let's go out now and do it nationwide, or do it in one of the German states. We know it since Head Start that these large programs, when they are implemented, lose quality, integrity, and then the effects go down. The smaller ones, there are other reasons. There could be a publication bias. Smaller studies require a larger effect to get significant, and often they are then only reported, and the non-significant are not reported. But we find similar things even in unreported studies. But you see, the effect size of large studies is clearly lower than of small studies. Moderator effects. We could not do much moderator analysis because the studies number is too small, and then you have not large subsets of studies with the same characteristics. No significant effects of moderators such as theoretical background, type of program, manualization, program intensity and duration, group size, combination of parent and child training. But as I mentioned, Mark Lipsey has written an excellent article in 2003 on these ugly and bad moderators, because the more you differentiate, the lower the number of studies and the less you can really replicate moderator effects. Summary and conclusions on this study: overall small to moderate positive effects. Parent-related effects somewhat stronger than child-related effects. This could be a mediation process, and we find it also, but I don't go in detail. Larger effects, this is written not correctly. In targeted prevention, lower effects in studies with more rigorous designs, still a relatively small number of high-quality evaluations, but positive development in the last decade, more studies with a good quality and a longer follow-up. And nearly all our findings, and this is a good news for us, are consistent to what we found in the North American and in our own international reviews. So it seems to be the case that some basic things can be transferred into other countries. But within Germany, the question is, can we generalize to practice of prevention? As I have shown before, what goes on in practice is highly different in many cases from that what has been evaluated, and the practitioners will not immediately change their programs only because there's a systematic review. They go on with their own programs. Up to 2/3 low-structured parent-child groups in practice, but only one controlled evaluation on that. Of course, it's difficult to evaluate something where you don't know what it is and when you cannot do it in the next study. Parent trainings are overrepresented in research. Many evaluations in demonstration projects with active recruitment and targeted groups. This is different. Many more in practice are universally approaches in a neighborhood and so on. Long-term evaluation extremely rare, but this is the same not only in Germany, also internationally are very, very few long-term evaluations. David Farrington has recently published a special issue in 2013, I think, in the Journal of Experimental Criminology, edited, and it's only a handful of studies that had at least a follow-up of 10 years. And when we are talking about preventing violence development until youth or even young adulthood, of course it's not enough. It's good to have an effect after 6 months or after 1 year, but we need to follow up the pathway. This is why I use the time. A few minutes we have left because one presentation was not there. To give one example, this is our own study. This is one of the few very long-term, and it's a German study. It's not only North America where we have these long-term, but we are not as good as many North American studies. This is the Erlangen-Nuremberg Development and Prevention Study. It's a combined prospective longitudinal experimental design, 600 families, preschool children. We had involved 189 preschool teachers, elementary school teachers, and 178 children received the child social skills training, and 170 was based on the Spivak and Schur, but you always have to adapt to some degree these concepts, and a parent training with elements from the Patterson group. We have now 6 waves of assessment, and the last assessment was after 9 to 10 years. This is a design. A part is only the developmental study. Here we have the treatment, child training, parent training, and we wanted to test, is the combination better? Funding, very difficult, different sources, it's always a challenge. The programs, we called it Entwicklungsförderung in Familien, Eltern- und Kindertraining, EFFECT. This is the same as EFFECT with a C in England. We got some effects, otherwise many people would have loved, we call a program effect. We did not reflect about this when we choose the name. It's a short program, relatively short program, and the typical contents you always have in these programs: identification of emotions, reasons for behavior, alternative solutions finding, so social problem solving, and so on. And a short parent training, we did some pilots and we found out as a universal program, you should start with a short program because then you don't have so many dropouts, parenting, behavior, coping with stress, and so on. No details. This is how the program materials look, and this is one of these typical preschool groups. I skipped this. The process evaluation was fine. On-task behavior was okay. The parents were satisfied, but this is not a sufficient criterion. We had also direct effects on social problem solving, positive parenting reports, and so on. And we had a group-wise randomization with matching and with a statistical control and an intent to treat analysis. We did not randomize on the individual level. This is also a practical problem because when in one kindergarten the child 1 gets it and child number 2 don't get it, first they are talking to each other, they show even the materials, and second they get jealous, oh he gets it. And the same with the parents, then the parents drop out. So we randomized on the level of the kindergartens or the preschools, so they were not in contact, or normally not in contact. Short-term effects, 2 to 3 months. I would like to demonstrate to you some of the problems, not so much the effects are the important issues. Overall, there is a positive effect. You see here, this was the SBQ from Richard Trombley's social behavior questionnaire. Here are the scores in this short follow-up period, and you see we really succeeded with our matching. The level is the same for treatment and control, and here are the post scores. Some of the effect is also due to a slight worsening of the control group. These are for the different, these are now the net effects. Here you have this worsening here. So this is a relatively large effect, as you see here, of the combined training from -1 to 3, it's 0.40. And here, positive for all types of programs. Those above the median in the SBQ before the training benefited most. This is, but not the same in all types of our programs. It's best in the combined and in the child training. Here the total, but no detail. Now, one of the follow-ups after 4 to 5 years, this looks pretty nice. Control group, SBQ, and SBQ means educator report, in this case, teacher report. So this means, this is child self-report, sorry, but we also have other data. Here is child report. It looks positive, and it is, in 2 cases, total score and parenting training. Even after 4 to 5 years, we have a significant effect. Delinquency, significant effects, but not for the parent training, not for the combined training. Long-term effects after approximately 10 years. Pattern is still okay. This is a little higher than this. This is a self-reported delinquency scale, a German one from my group. The effect sizes are pretty low and nothing is significant. When you go to property offenses, we have an overall, not as strong, but we have a significance. When it goes to long-term effects, property offenses for boys, it looks even better. We come up to 0.48 as an effect. But we had no long-term findings in self-reported aggressive offenses, only the property. It has to do with the base rate also, because in a universal sample, violent offenses are relatively low, particularly in this area where we implemented the programs. This is relatively better. Erlangen and Nuremberg. Erlangen is a relatively rich city, but the university is there, and Nuremberg is a more working class city. And no significant effects in mothers' reports in the SPQ. Conclusions, small effects, and they are plausible. This is in full agreement with meta-analysis in this field. But, and this is what I would like to raise your attention for, there's an outcome variation between different follow-up times, outcome measures, and informants. This is difficult to explain. Sometimes you do not find a real good reason why you have an effect in this measure, but not in the other measure. But we are not alone with these problems. When you look in detail, I mentioned already Cambridge Somerville Youth Study, Fast Track, a great program. Sometimes they have an effect and sometimes they don't have an effect. Now they have an effect after, in late adolescence, in arrests, but not in self-reported delinquency, a significant effect. Why? Normally we would say self-reported is more sensitive to changes. Nurse-family partnership, one of the best stories in the world we have. Longest follow-up shows a significant effect for girls before they had good effects for boys, mainly. So there are these discrepancies also in MSD you sometimes, I don't go into it. So there is a risk, and this is why I presented this data on property offenses and boys, of fishing for significances. You only present your good finding and ignore all the others, and this is why Campbell collaboration is important also, because we say there must be a protocol, so the people must know what was done and not only presenting because a company was to make money with a program, also a big problem, the good ones. And you also think we need to rethink about the complexity of developmental prevention and the complexity of what means evidence-based and the complexity, I go here, that it is not only the program, it is many factors that have an impact on a positive or not so positive outcome. I listed in a model 2 years ago a number of factors where I found some systematic data, at least, some from meta-analysis, some only from single studies. Program factors, of course, type of program, multimodality, quality of implementation, all these things that Ross has just mentioned, intensity of dosage, a little effect. And sometimes shorter programs have also good effects. Individualization. We found in one of our reviews some kind of individualization, not a fully fixed manual, is better than the standard approach where you cannot really be sensitive to specific needs of the family. Context factors, staff competence, staff kind, I don't go into detail. Natural protective factors, a program always works in a broader context of influences, community and system factors. Risk level is important, motivation, Gender, ethnicity, not so much research on that, how ethnicity plays a role. A strong impact is always the evaluation method we are applying. Quality of evaluation, sample size, practice versus demonstration, always better effect in demonstration projects. Whether it's an independent evaluation or whether it is done by the program developers or implementers themselves, type of outcome and length of follow-up. So my view goes very much in your direction. Programs should be the core, but then you must build a lot of other factors. Relationship is of important. Integrity, always staff training, always monitoring these things. But we were not negative in our outcomes with our effect program, so we started some other studies and some modifications of our program. We adapted it for children from families with a migration background, because we had not many Turks in our original sample. Turks, they did not come. So we adapted. We at first worked with the parents to discuss the values of parenting they have. If a rural Turkish family that came to Germany, if you tell them, you should not slap, they say, what? Slapping is the right way to get him well over time. My grandparents also thought in this sense. So there are cultural values of how you should educate. We have a program modification now for parents with emotional problems, mothers in particular. So we disseminated the program, and we now have 1,600 facilitators trained. And I think it is a stepwise process to move into this more complex and more differentiated world of prevention, and not only delivering. This was how developmental prevention started. We call it the Nuremberg funnel, my hometown Nuremberg. And this was in the 18th century. These are the magistrates. Here is the client. And here he has needs. He is lacking something. He has deficits. They pour a liquid directly into his head. And the saying was, sicher und schnell macht die Köpfe hell, is safe and quick in making heads bright. This is what many people promised for developmental prevention. And some people promise the same for situational prevention. But in reality, it's a complex interplay of factors. And if we are able to control and improve some of these factors, then I think we have a real long-term impact. The Nuremberg funnel got lost, so you may not get it, make the heads so quickly bright. Thank you very much.
Well, congratulations for surviving two very solid presentations. We have just a few minutes for questions for Friedrich. Or is everybody wanting lunch? I think we've actually had a feast of information, if I could say modestly, from both papers. A lot to think about. I do have some handouts. Summaries, and also a handout on that new game that I mentioned. So if anyone's interested, you can pick up a copy from the front. Would you all join with me in thanking Friedrich for and all the speakers this morning? Thank you. Thank you. Okay.